Good evening. Welcome to JT's workshop, where I take a look at different kinds of skills and crafts. And today I'm going to make a Kataginu, which is like a vest for a kimono. So I make kimono and I have like haori, which is kind of like a jacket for it, but now I'm going to make a vest and I have some fabric here to do that. This will be a very easy project. There are not a lot of panels, and of course they're all rectangular because it's Japanese sewing, and it can all be done by machine except for part of the collar and maybe some of the hem finishing. Let's get to it. We'll make a design for it based on my measurements, and I'll give you some instructions to use your own measurements. I already have the fabric cut out, but I'll just be sewing it together. So here are the measurements that I'm gonna have. So first it's going to be the sleeve opening, which is probably going to be about 20 inches consistently, and the total height 36 inches, or you could probably take your height from your shoulder down to the floor and multiply that by 2/3, or just wherever depending on how long you actually want it to be. And then we have this distance from the collar to the center, and I guess for that you could take your neck circumference and divide that by 4 and maybe round up a little. I rounded up a lot because I'll probably be wearing this over like other layers, such as the undergarment and then the kimono if I am wearing it with that. And then we have this measurement down here, which is the back measurement from the center to the side seam. And for me that's 12 inches, and the way you get this is by measuring around your hips at the widest point and then dividing by 4, and then I added in like an extra inch or so of ease because again this is probably going to be worn over other garments and probably you'd want it to fit a little more loosely. Now about the construction, we're going to have 2 panels for the body going from front to back on both sides, folded at the katayama. Then we're going to French seam that for the center back seam, and then we're going to make the side seams and then finish the edge here. Probably hem this up first, the bottom, and then sew in the collar last. First I'm going to have to apologize because my microphone that I was recording on stopped working, so it's mostly going to be voiceover. But here I'm measuring out the fabric that I have and then comparing that with the length that I'm going to need based on my measurements. And I'm actually going to find that there's a lot of excess for both the body panels and the collar panels, which I'm measuring right now. Now we're going to get to cutting the fabric to the correct length. And I don't want to cut off too much fabric because I still want to have enough to where I have a bit of room to play with to hem the bottom of the garment. And the amount that I take off is actually such that I have enough excess fabric to add on sleeves to the garment if I wish to do that later. But in this video, I'm not going to be doing that. But if in the future I do wish to, then the fabric's there and I can just use it whenever. Now doing the other side. I'm ironing in the katayama, which is the point at which the body panels move from the front to the back, which usually sits around the shoulders. Here I'm now sewing together the 2 collar pieces. So the collar is actually going to consist of 2 pieces, one going down the right side and the other going down the left, because I didn't have enough length in just one piece to cover the entire garment. So I'm sewing that together, and I'm also gonna sew the center back seam on, and to do this I'm using a French seam. And actually here I'm doing it incorrectly. I have the right sides together, whereas the wrong sides should be together, because when doing the French seam I'm going to turn it inside out and then sew it again to complete the seam. But I'd not do it in this case, and you're going to see me figure that out real soon. And I'm definitely going to have to unpick the seam, which was unfortunate. Oh no. This should have been... It should have been wrong side together, so that when I iron it, it's right sides together, so I can complete the French seam. So yeah, now I have to unpick all of that I just sewed, and I'm going to have to redo it again. It isn't the most difficult task, it's just a bit of an inconvenience. Now finally ironing it back the correct way. French seams always do get me when I haven't been sewing for a little while. Now I'm going to finish it out. And there we have a French seam properly made for the center back seam. Now I'm going to figure out the side seams. And when it comes to traditional Japanese sewing, we aren't going to be cutting the fabric to size. We'll just put the excess fabric into the seam allowance. And here I'm figuring out where I should be sewing and leaving an extra opening at the top for the armhole. But you see, I actually have a fixed distance calculated that I'm going to put onto the side seam. And I can do that because I marked out on my sewing machine extra graduations of the distance, so that I can have pretty big distances on my sewing machine and still keep it accurate. Now I'm just finishing out that side seam. Usually I finish it a different way, but I couldn't quite do it in this case. But I'm not going to get into that right now. Now I'm going to iron the armhole opening, just so it's all neat, and eventually I'll sew that down by hand. Now we're working with the collar again. We have the center of the collar, but now we're just cutting it down to size, just so there isn't too much excess fabric. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do with the excess. Usually you would just tuck it into the collar itself at the bottom of the hem, but in this case there would just be way too much fabric, so I'm just cutting some of it off and I'll deal with it later. Now I didn't quite get video of me ironing all of this, but as you can see, one of the sides of the collar is smaller, because what's going to happen is when we put on the collar, it's going to be folded back. So I don't want one of the sides to get in the way of that fold. And you're going to probably see what I mean when I finish the garment and put it on. It's just kind of like a lapel of a Western style suit jacket. But now I'm making the hem for the garment, and it's just rather simple, just a nice rolled hem. And now marking out the neck opening, just taking a few inches off and cutting it open, and then pinning the collar into place. Now this is usually the trickiest part of the process, is pinning the collar in place and sewing it. Although on this Kataginu it's a little bit easier than like a kimono, because it's rather just square and straight, whereas there is a bit of an angle when it comes to kimono. The sewing is rather straightforward. It's just all the way around. I can do it all in one go. The only thing is that for the other side of the collar, when I'm going to fold it down and finish it, is all done by hand. And you see I take care to get that excess fabric and put it into the fold of the collar to finish it off. I don't cut it off again, because if someone else comes along and wants to make a garment to their own size, they can still use that excess fabric Now you're going to be able to see the intricate way in which the bottom is folded so that it's all nice and neat and packaged in the end. And right now it isn't even quite there. It's still a little messy, but you're going to see soon how it's actually done. You see I'm tucking in that bottom part into the collar, so it's just one single piece, it almost appears to be. And it still may be a bit confusing, but if you take a look at my other video on sewing a kimono, then you may be able to see a bit more clear what I'm doing here, and many of the other methods of construction in this video. So here's the finished product, and it's looking pretty nice. I like the color contrast. And I didn't have a kimono to wear with it, but I did have a haori, so hopefully this works just as well.